Yeah, these deep ethical issues are just really intriguing. They're good food for thought. They feed your mind, you know.
Yes,
They keep you
yes,
interested.
yes.
I think about 10 years ago is when Rasmussen University added the Ethics Around the Globe course. There's a growing need and just a recognition in universities that they need to start teaching ethics, need to
Right,
start getting professionals to start thinking about ethical duties.
right, right.
And,
That is
you
so
know,
true.
there's so much to talk about.
Yes, well, this reading this week, it was it was sad, but it was good reading because reading about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all, and actually reading, and I can remember, you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh my gosh, wow. And it's like this shouldn't be happening. It
No.
shouldn't be happening.
What do you think about the Breonna Taylor incident? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, that 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 just mm, I mean, for them to go just wrong. And I think, and if I'm not mistaken, if what I heard, I thought the policeman that went in, I guess to the, I don't know, was it the apartment next door or whatever, he didn't get charged, and I'm like, well, how that happened? What you mean? It just didn't seem right to me. I mean, just didn't seem right. I didn't I that kind of hurt my heart. So much was going on during that time. It was like I remember it so well, but then it took a deeper, it meant something more to me after everything else going. I'm like, oh man, that young lady, this shouldn't have had to happen. This just don't make sense. I
No,
don't I didn't like it for sure.
no. And let me introduce the live session and then we'll get to the police misconduct. Welcome everyone to the Module 6 live session for the Ethics Around the Globe course. Our topic this week is racism, discrimination, terrorism, and torture. This meeting is being recorded so that you can watch it later at your convenience. And recently, we've seen a lot of examples of police using excessive force, and it appears to be that in some instances that's been motivated um, by the race of the victim. And Barbara and I were just talking about um, Breonna's case that was out in Kentucky. Breonna was sleeping at home when the police came to execute a no-knock warrant. Who they were looking for, well, what they were looking for was evidence of drug dealing. Brianna's ex-boyfriend was a drug dealer, but he no longer lived at her residence. Hi, Jenny. So, so yes, in Brianna's case, the police were coming to her house to execute a search warrant. It was a no-knock warrant. They were looking for evidence of drug dealing. They had in order to get a warrant, a judge has to find probable cause that a crime has been committed. So they actually filled out 6 different applications for warrants, and they finally got a judge to sign off on this this no-knock warrant. And what they were looking for was evidence of drug dealing, and it was based on the theory that Brianna's ex-boyfriend lived in her home and he was dealing drugs. Now, I'm a lawyer. I can tell you that that is not enough evidence to justify um, a magistrate to issue a search warrant. Why? Well, one thing, the information is stale. Her ex-boyfriend used to live there. They're no longer dating. He no longer lives there. So, in my opinion, that search warrant was not supported by probable cause. And the police officer who requested the search warrant, I think, was punished and fired, because the information that he provided to the judge did not provide probable cause for the issuance of a search warrant. Anyway, after 6 applications for warrant, the police did get a no-knock warrant. So they went to Brianna's house at night, right, when everyone was asleep. They were not wearing their uniforms, right? They were plain clothes, which makes you again wonder why they were there without their uniforms on. They're not in uniform, and they're executing a no-knock warrant. Well, at the last minute, the court changed the warrant to knock and announce. That means the police should have been there in their uniforms. They should have announced their presence. They should have stated why they were there to execute a search warrant, and they should have knocked and announced, right? So the facts indicated that the police knocked and within 1 minute busted down the door. Neighbors said that they never heard the police announce their presence. Again, that's illegal police conduct. So Brianna's new boyfriend, who is not a drug dealer, thought that somebody was breaking into the house. He grabbed his gun and shot through the door. He hit one of the police officers in the leg. So now the police believe that they're justified to shoot back because they're faced with an armed suspect on the other side of that door. So they break the door down and just start shooting. And there's 3 police officers. One of them goes around the back of the house and just starts shooting into a bedroom with the blinds closed. And that's where Brianna was asleep. And the medical examiner believes within 1 minute of being shot, she died. At no point did the police even attempt to render any medical assistance or aid to her. So, in my opinion, from a legal perspective, not even looking at race, not even looking at race. I mean, maybe race was the motivation in part for the initial search warrant, perhaps. But you could actually analyze that Brianna case without even looking at race and just see that it was police misconduct. First of all, the warrant is not supported by probable cause. They did not follow the details of the warrant, which was that they were supposed to knock and announce their presence and why they were there. They should have been in uniform, because if I saw somebody come into my door just wearing plain clothes and beating on it loudly at night, I'd be scared. I mean, would you be scared? What do you think about that, Jenny? If somebody comes to your door in the middle of the night, they're not wearing a police uniform or a firefighter uniform or any type of uniform. They're just beating on the door really loud. I would be scared. And then they break the door down. You know, I would, I think if, I don't own a firearm, but if I did, I might reach for it in those situations, in a circumstance like that. So I think the police acted unreasonably, illegally, and with excessive force. There was no justification whatsoever for shooting into the back of the house, into the room where Brianna was sleeping when the blinds were down. The house could have been, full of, there could have been 2 families in there. The police had no reason to believe that there weren't people in the house, yet they're just recklessly shooting into the house. No. So that's in my that you could actually analyze that, the Breonna Taylor, you could actually analyze that case without even looking at race. That's just a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Any thoughts about that?
Again, it's sad to know that they acted like that. I mean, because I'm thinking, looking at, because I have a daughter, and what if, that would have been my daughter, and that, I mean, I yeah, I don't think it was fair. Mm-mm.
No, the only thing I can think of is, we've all been told, do not hang around criminals, right?
Right,
So the best advice, of course, is for anyone to teach their child, do not date drug dealers or people who use drugs, because that element, attracts trouble, right? If the
right,
police decide to come after your friend or boyfriend who's doing drugs, dealing drugs, you might get caught up in it. And that's really what happened here. She was
right.
dating a drug dealer. That's not a very good decision on her part.
No, no,
But no,
that's
that
a
can never justify the police, violating her civil rights and
mm-mm.
just stepping all over the Constitution, violating the code of ethics, um, uh, putting together false affidavits to get a no-knock search warrant that's not supported by probable cause.
Right. Well, something happened to me about a year ago where I live alone. I don't, I'm divorced and my kids are all off, living their lives. And the cops came to my door and I was on the phone on a conference call and the cops came to my door and I had my ring, so I looked and I saw that the cops were at the door, but I could tell that they were like SWAT. And I'm like, what they doing here? Because ain't nothing going on here. Only I live here. But I did at that time have two cars. So one car was in the garage and one was sitting in the driveway. And come to find out, they were looking for someone that they thought lived at this address. And I mean, thank God I opened the garage door because I didn't even open my front door because they were standing there. Their presence was heavy at the front door. So I opened the garage door, but I stood back with, and I was on the phone with of someone, and I kept them on the phone, and I asked them, and so one got cop came, to the garage door, and I was like, excuse me, may I help you? And then they were saying what, and they was like, well, who are you? I'm the lady that lives here, and I have ID, I can show you, and I only live, it's only me live here. And then they said, well, I see a car here and a car. I got two cars. It's like, that's not a crime. I can have two cars. And my neighbor happened to be outside and he was like, Miss Swinton, what's going on? And then of course, we, they left peacefully, but they had their hands on their guns. They were ready to start something, or I guess, or if something would have started. What if I'd have went to the door packing myself or something, because I do carry, but I didn't. I mean, I knew not to do that at that time, but it's like that was scary for me because I'm like, well, what if they had a went just not take my word and went off? I could have ended up. I could have been in the news. It was like, wow. Because that, but I don't even know how the person that they said stayed here. I've lived in the same house for 30 something years. I was like, well, did anybody ask or you just took it for granted that that person stayed here? Because no, I mean, I could show you statements from 30 years ago that I've been here, but it's like, I didn't understand that. I was a little upset, but I got over it, but still, I kept thinking because of everything that has happened, I was trying to be as cautious as I could so that I wasn't uh, in
The next victim.
the next victim, right? I didn't want to
Yeah,
say
you did
that,
the
but
right
yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. But so I know innocent mistakes do happen, but at the same time, I don't think even that day for them to come here, did you check records? You just what you should have seen that only one person was down. I mean, of course, my husband used to be on but he's not on the deed or anything anymore. But did you look at anything or you just who told you that that person stayed here? That's what I couldn't understand.
Yes, the police make mistakes, and it's more important than ever that people get their facts right, that they double check the facts, that they make sure the story is straight before they start shooting, you know? You did the right thing, which is to de-escalate the situation. You see, in Breonna Taylor's case, the man that she was dating at the time escalated the situation because he started shooting at the police. It is never a good idea for anyone to shoot at the police. Why? They have the authority of the government to enforce the law. So when people do not respect the authority of police, that's never going to end well. So there were some mistakes made on the part mostly of the man that she lives with, which is to he started, he pulled a gun out and shot at the police. You can't escalate a situation when you're dealing with trigger happy cops, some of whom, may be on steroids. They've got a Rambo mentality. If you look at the type of people that are attracted to the police force and the type of people that the police like to hire, they're, looking, they get a thrill, a rush off of these confrontations with citizens where they get to use their training, right? I mean, what is the point of going to the police academy, learning how to shoot a gun if you never get to, actually shoot at a person, right? So that's the mentality of the police. When they come to, especially when they're coming to execute either an arrest warrant or a search warrant, they're gung-ho. They're ready to start shooting. So, as a citizen on the other side of that gun, you need to be ready to de-escalate. And that's what you did. You wisely went around to your garage where they weren't. You calmly talked to them. You de-escalated the situation because, they're high on testosterone and who knows what else. They're just ready to start shooting for the thrill, the thrill of being police and what they've been trained to do, what they believe in. So it's a very tough situation. And people do, I think, in reality have to be ready to de-escalate an encounter with police instead of doing what Breonna Taylor's boyfriend did, which was escalate the interaction with police by bringing out a firearm and shooting a policeman in the leg. That's never gonna end well when anybody points a gun at the police. It's never gonna end well. That's
I
just
don't
common
think
sense.
I don't think it should necessarily end well if they point a gun at the police. I mean, rule number one, you point a gun, you're prepared to use it. I mean, as a person who owns a firearm, that's rule number one. If you point it, you better be prepared to use it. And police have to anticipate that. On the other hand, as you were saying, some are very egotistical and like they're gung ho with it. I agree with that. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of police officers who are there for the good. They are there for the community. I know managing multiple group homes and working in that setting, there are some that come in to situations and they're, well, you want to go to jail? They'll take you to jail. That's how this is going to go down today. And then you have other ones that come in and they understand that they're dealing with someone with a mental health disability. They come in, they're calm. They really are good at de-escalating and helping instead of progress the situation. I had one individual that got mad at me because I wouldn't buy him food with my company card. And he eloped. So I started walking behind him. I followed at a safe distance and I contacted the police. And I said, this is part of his protocol. He elopes, we call you guys. And we probably walked a good 2.5 miles before the police got there. And this is a big guy. He was very animated, very upset. He started walking up to the cops saying, you gotta get her away from me. And the cops handled it very calmly. Hey, why don't you tell me what's going on? And they were at the same time too, they had their hand on their gun because they don't know how he's going to react. But it was, why don't you talk about it? And it was very helpful. And then they ended up giving us a ride back to the program, which I have to say that was my first time ever in the police car. But yeah, I mean, I think there are times where there are I've worked with them, very egotistical, just jerks. Just one of those guys, just give me a reason type of people. But there's quite a few others that are there for the right reason, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jenny. It's never an all or nothing situation. We can never generalize. Everybody is an individual. There are obviously, hundreds of thousands of excellent police officers. Otherwise, we would be hearing about these incidents around the clock, right? There are a lot of police officers who know how to handle the situation, who act with compassion, who follow the law, who follow the code of conduct. So, how do we get rid of bad cops? How do we distinguish bad cops? What should the chief of police be doing to fix the problem, and how to address police misconduct among the small number of individuals who actually engage in that? How should they be handled? How do we deal with the small number of individuals who engage in police misconduct?
I
I mean,
think
I'm
they need,
sure.
sorry,
Go ahead.
I think that they need to do more thorough evaluations. I think it would not be a bad thing if police were followed by a trainer longer than the time that they are. And honestly, to say more training, I really don't think so. I mean, if you look at the, I don't remember her name, she just had her trial, but she shot a gentleman because she thought it was a taser.
I
And
remember.
I watched that trial. And they went through, I think she was on the force between 16 and 20 some years, I think.
Exactly. She had
And
all the
they said,
training.
so you've had training, like taser training every year for, X amount of years, and you still mixed it up. And you've always kept your taser on this side of your hip and your gun on this hip, but yet you still grab the wrong one. So, I mean, I think that gives training a bad name because I do think that was an excuse. Um, just from what I've seen in the trial itself. But I mean, actual training where people are being signed off and actually going through with it can't hurt. Um, but it can't be the excuse for everything. But I think, being followed, check in with people more, have someone do ride-alongs more often. Um, there's ways that the community itself should be able to confidently report what is going on. If they have bad run-ins with the police, they shouldn't be afraid to report that officer. Um, I think that would be a big thing. Because how many officers do you find out they've had X amount of citations for inappropriate conduct and nothing was ever done?
That's the problem right there, Jenny, is when something is done like that, the chief of police, their supervisor, the police sergeant needs to be responsible instead of looking the other way and sweeping it under the carpet. They need to follow up on those misconduct complaints. Like, for example, getting back to the George Floyd incident, Derek Chauvin, the police officer who put his knee on George Floyd's neck, already had at least 20 citizen complaints against him. He had already killed at least 2 people. A grand jury had already been assembled to determine whether or not to charge him with murder in another case, and the prosecutor never followed up with that. So that is a failure on the part of the police, disciplinary proceedings to actually intervene before he killed another person. So that's a failure of the system to properly discipline and correct misbehavior and misconduct on the part of the police. And again, it's a failure of the criminal justice system because instead of charging him with murder for another man he had already killed maybe 5 or 10 years earlier, the prosecutor chose to look the other way. And I think the prosecutor at the time was she is she's a senator now. um I can't remember her name. She's a Democratic senator from Minnesota, but she was at that time though, she held the job as prosecutor, and she was the one that should have been prosecuting him 10 years earlier for another person he'd already committed, and she didn't do that. I think the reason that she said she didn't do it is because the grand jury did not come back, with the decision to indict or something like that. So but at any rate, it was the failure of several people to not intervene sooner and correct the misconduct of this officer that resulted in him once again engaging in the excessive use of force with his neck on the knee of George Floyd and killing him. There were certainly a lot of warning signs that were ignored, right? And
Yeah, in my
correct.
opinion, that was
Mhm.
that was a complete joke. Um, I mean, it's George Floyd wasn't a saint. He was not by any means a good man.
Mhm.
He did not deserve to go down like that. That
Mm-mm.
was insane. And watching the videos just after it came out, the amount of people that were screaming at him to get off, he can't breathe, he's passed out, get off his neck, was just, that was horrible. That man should never have been a police officer. Um,
Exactly.
especially like you said, with as many complaints and questionable things he's done. He never should have been a police officer. Um, yeah, that, and I mean, it's cases like that you see, and I can't remember where it was, but I believe there was a situation almost identical with a white man that had a knee placed on his neck and he died also. And it's like that's excessive force. Like you really don't need that. So I really think too that they should look at their tactics and the way that they do handle things. I mean, it's a
Yes.
broken system. It needs to be fixed, but I don't think it needs to be removed as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, we don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But yeah, the bathwater needs to be changed a little bit. A few things need to be fixed. It was Amy Klobuchar. She was the district attorney in Hennepin County at the time when Derek Chauvin was maybe 10 years ago suspected of having killed another person. She did not move forward with the charges. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, like you said, the system, the reason that we have problems with the system is because of the individuals who have been put in positions of authority are not doing their jobs correctly, right? They're looking the other way. They're employing police officers who are too violent, who don't have any respect for the law, the rules, and that can only be corrected through discipline. They're going to have to, I think if a police officer is receives 2 or 3 citizen complaints, then the police sergeant, the chief of police, someone needs to be looking into that and following up. And that's not what's happening. They're just looking the other way, pretending it didn't happen. And that's not going to be that kind of. We need to stop normalizing that kind of police excessive force. So, one of our topics this week is discrimination. What's the first thing that comes to mind these days when you hear the word discrimination? And it is because everyone has a cell camera now, a cell phone camera. It's the police brutality that people have been capturing on their cell phones. And as Jenny said, the police will put their knee on anybody's neck. It's not necessarily one race people are doing it to. I think it may seem more egregious, right? When it's done to an African American suspect, we automatically start to think, oh, it's race discrimination. But anytime that the police feel like their authority is being challenged, right, they will engage in excessive force against people of any race or gender. And I think we saw that during some of these Black Lives Matter protests back in 2020. This photograph here is of a protest that was being held in Buffalo. It started out as a peaceful protest, and at some point, the police officers were told to disperse the crowd. And this older gentleman here decided he was going to approach the police and try to reason with them. After they've been given a lawful authority to disperse the crowd, they've already got their combat gear on. And, sadly, this older gentleman the police knocked him to the ground. He cracked his head open. He was in a coma for months. I think he almost died, but he barely lived. And what do you think about a situation like that? I mean, is it ethical for someone to approach the police and try to stop them when they've been told to disperse a crowd? Do you think that's ethical? I mean, we know it's not wise.
I don't think it is ethical because at that point they're trying to stand in between the police doing their job. On the other hand, I mean, in this picture alone, there's 30 police to one suspect. I mean, was that force really needed? I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
I mean, really.
What was happening is the photograph doesn't show it, Jenny, but there was a protest going on, and the police were told to disperse the crowd. One member of the protester, one of the protesters decided, let me see if I can reason with the police and talk them out of coming in to disperse the crowd. And you can see what that is. We're in this photo, we're not shown the size of the crowd of protesters. We're just shown him because he feels like, they won't they won't knock me down if I just come up and try to talk to them. That's what he thought, but they let him know that race, age, nothing. If you challenge their authority, you're going to be lying on your back bleeding, and
Well,
that
if
is.
that's the case, I think the officers were just in what they did. I mean, they were given a job to do, especially when there's a crowd that large. If one person can stop the police, then what are 100 people going to do? What are 200 people going to do? Especially once we saw what the protest turned into,
Yeah,
and
I
as
agree.
dangerous as it became.
I can tell you, not in a million years, if the police, especially like this guy's almost like an innocent bystander. If there's a group of people rioting, I'm not going to get involved, first of all. But if the police are coming out there to disperse the crowd, do you think I'm going to run over and try to say, "Oh, you can't disperse that crowd"? No, I'm going to keep right on going about my business, and I'm not going to get involved. And then, therefore, I'm not going to end up, on my back with my head bleeding. It's just, it's a I wonder sometimes about the current status of common sense in this society. But yeah, if you're going to try to stop the police from doing their job, they've been told by their police chief what they have to do, which is to disperse the crowd. This guy escalated the incident, right, by trying to get in their faces and talk to them. And I don't think they were ready to talk at that exact moment, But the next day, guess what happened? The entire police force in Buffalo resigned. The very next day, they all resigned. That's just dysfunctional, in my opinion. The whole thing is just it just doesn't seem that it just seems, yeah, the next day, the entire police force, that whole precinct, they just resigned. Totally dysfunctional. And then we've heard about this defund the police movement, and several localities have defunded the police. Discrimination. So the police act with the authority of the state to maintain order, investigate crimes, and arrest suspects. But again, the police are not the judge, jury, and executioner. So getting back to the George Floyd case, if we look into George Floyd's past, he committed a home invasion in Texas probably 15 years ago, where he held a gun to a woman's stomach. That's obviously not good. But he did his time in Texas for his prior crimes. And no matter how evil George Floyd is, the police were only there that day to investigate him for passing. It was either a bad check or it was a counterfeit $20 bill, I think. The police are not judge, jury, and executioner. That is not how our system of justice works. The police are simply there to investigate a crime and detain a suspect if necessary. and, arrest somebody, take them down to the station for further questioning. They are not supposed to shoot to kill. They're not supposed to kill the suspect. They're not supposed to make it so that they can't breathe. They're not playing God. That's not their job, And I think sometimes the police get gung ho and they go beyond their constitutional authority and their role, which they are not judge, jury, and executioner. Those functions are all carried out later on. So, the U.S. Constitution guarantees a right to life, liberty, due process, a fair trial, equal protection of the laws. Police brutality is definitely an issue. There are many cases involving the excessive use of force by police to detain or arrest a suspect. What do you think about these cases? The traffic stops where there have been a lot of traffic stops where the police may pull someone over, and it seems to be a lot of African American suspects because there is racial profiling, but they'll pull anybody over, and they pull someone over, and maybe the driver is not showing their license, they're not showing their registration, they're not showing their insurance. Or what if the driver tries to drive away? Do you think the police are justified in shooting at the vehicle during a traffic stop if the driver does not comply with their commands? What do you think, Barbara? Should the police start shooting during a traffic stop if the driver maybe tries to leave or doesn't provide insurance?
I would say no. No, I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, they shouldn't do that. And I have a son and I have a daughter, and I told them both, if the police stops you, stop, do as they ask. Now that they had cell phones by the time, I say, call me and just leave the phone laying there or something, but don't have it in your hand. But do what the police tells you to do. Now, if someone takes off, yes, they didn't do what the police said, but I don't know if you should shoot them. I mean, that to me don't seem right. Because what if you shoot somebody, an innocent person that wasn't? So I think they should handle it, but not shoot. No, do not shoot.
Yeah,
I
that's
agree with
excessive
Barbara.
force.
I
Mm-hmm.
agree with Barbara. There's no reason why they can't, run the person down later.
Right.
You have the card tags if the car is stolen. You can do an investigation, try to figure out who did it, but you're putting way too many people's lives at risk by doing that. In the sense, depending on the situation, I would say it's almost the same thing with the car chase. At that point, is it really worth the risk? You're putting more people's lives in danger than you're going to capture. So, in that sense, and, not every situation, I mean, it's kind of specific to each case, but, I agree with Barbara. It's not worth it.
Mm-mm.
Do your job and find them down the road,
Yeah, the police are only allowed to use reasonable force under the Fourth Amendment. It's illegal search and seizure when they escalate a situation like that by shooting at someone. It's murder, right? If the police are shooting at someone during a traffic stop because the car has rolled away, first of all, that's the officer's ego because their authority is not being respected, and that's sad. But it does not, again, it does not justify the use of excessive force when that driver maybe just doesn't comply with the officer's request during the traffic stop. They're not justified in shooting and killing, beating, or harassing that person because that's excessive force. It's assault and battery. Assault and battery is a crime. Murder is a crime. The police officers are not immune from the criminal law. They're not immune from the civil laws either. The only time that the police have a defense is if they are acting in self-defense or the defense of someone else, or if they're using reasonable force. I think that shooting a fleeing suspect who is not armed is excessive force. By law, that's excessive force. Excessive force is a violation of civil rights. Let's talk about this other case, which I think is so interesting. This case happened about 10 years ago now in Utah. This nurse was at work, and a patient came into her ward. The patient was unconscious after having been involved in a car accident. The police suspected that the patient had been driving under the influence of alcohol. Well, how can the police find out if this unconscious patient was driving under the influence of alcohol? Because, see, they want to do a DUI investigation, right? They want to find out. But how can they do that when, there's been a car accident and the driver's been rushed to the hospital? How do they find that
Blood
out,
test.
Jenny? Huh?
They do a blood test.
Okay. A blood test is a search and seizure within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment. So, in order for the police to do a search and seizure, they need to have a warrant. How are they going to get a warrant when this guy is in the hospital unconscious?
Call a judge. Do it
Right,
the
there is
legal
a
way.
yeah, there's a telephonic warrant, and that is what they should have done. They should have called a judge and gotten a warrant. Even if it's in the middle of the night, you wake the judge up, you get a telephonic warrant, and then you draw the blood. They didn't do that. They just marched in the hospital and told this nurse, go in there and draw his blood. She's like, that's her in the first picture. She takes out a piece of paper, which is the hospital's policies. Again, no search and seizure without a warrant. So when she finds out they don't have a warrant, she tells them, I cannot violate this patient's Fourth Amendment rights. He's unconscious. I can't just go in there and give you his blood. So they were mad at her. So they arrested her. Was she the one drinking and driving and causing the accident? No. But they arrested her. Do you think that is legal?
No.
And as you can see in the picture, did they need to lift her up like that to arrest? She's working as a nurse in the hospital. Notice that third picture, you can see it looks like her feet are off the air, like he grabbed her like she was a child.
No, that was excessive, especially when it's out of her hands. Like, it's literally their policy, and the police should know that, technically.
That she's the only one they could get, so they grabbed her, threw her into the police car, forced her in there, took her down to the station for questioning. Their superiors realized, look, this is illegal. You cannot hold her here in, in this, you can't hold her here in jail because a patient was driving under the influence and she refused to seize his blood without a warrant. So she hired a lawyer, filed a civil rights lawsuit, and her lawsuit was settled for some undisclosed amount. So at least she got some money out of it. But I think that's a clear use of excessive force. First of all, the police are not following the law because they need to get a warrant, and they didn't. They were too lazy. And then they just grabbed her and arrested her without probable cause to believe she's committed a crime. The only time police can arrest someone is if they have probable cause to believe she committed a crime. What crime did she commit?
I think the only thing they could rely on is maybe obstruction of justice. But in all reality, I hope this woman like got a raise or promotion or something, because that had to have been humiliating to be carried out of a hospital for
Like a
literally doing your
child.
job.
Yeah,
For doing your
that's
job, for protecting her patient.
you're right. She deserves a raise and a promotion. That job is hard anyway, To be a registered nurse is very difficult. They work long hours, sometimes 12, 14 hours a day. And then you've got police coming in and telling you what to do. So yeah, I think that it was the ego of the police officer that was hurt because she's not respecting his authority, right? And like you said, she's interfering with his attempts to complete an investigation. I can understand why a police officer would want to know whether a driver was intoxicated at the time they caused an accident. I can understand why they want to know that. But the Constitution determines how they're going to get that evidence. And to blame her and just arrest her like she's some little, woman, get in this car, just lifting her up. Like, I doubt that when she woke up that morning and went to work that she expected to be arrested. But yeah, I think we can all agree that's excessive force. She did win her civil rights lawsuit, at least. So, any other thoughts about this excessive use of force by police? It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, and it gives a right to file a civil rights lawsuit against the police, which is what's happened in the Breonna Taylor and George Floyd cases. Their families then file, like a wrongful death civil rights suit against the police force in the county, and they get some, several $1 million, which again is just, the whole thing is just twisted. The police kill someone, so you give their family $10 million in compensation. You're not giving that person their life back, but somebody's entitled to civil damages for the wrongful death. Let's move on to employment discrimination. So, have any of you encountered employment discrimination or seen anything like that happening where you work? Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, gender, and national origin. The exact language of Title VII is sex, but I don't want to mislead people into thinking what that is. That's why I said it actually means gender. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is a federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, and national origin. That means that in the hiring process, the promotional process, firing, the employer is not supposed to be looking at the gender of the person. There's not supposed to be a good old boy system where they promote all of their friends and lovers and any of this other stuff that goes on. So Barbara says, yes. Tell us a little bit about the employment discrimination that you've witnessed.
It was it was the good old boy. I mean, everyone that got a promotion, some of them had just come through the door. If they were cute, and I'm just gonna be honest, if they were cute, they of course they went ahead, they got promoted. The ones that were working hard, and it took them a long time to get a promotion. It took them a long time. And some of the people, and they, what was so weird was because some of the people that they gave the job to, because they just came through the door or cute, whatever came through, they ended up not being able to do the job. And then the person that they really overlooked that had been doing the job, and I can't say that it was all it wasn't racial, but in some of it I do believe it was, but it just wasn't fair. Just wasn't fair. And I'm gonna say it like this, it was hurtful to see so many people not being able for, and this went on for years. Now, I got particularly laid off from the same company, and I can't, I don't believe my color, it wasn't my religion or my gender. I believe it was my age. That everyone, when, because they had to give us a paper, everyone that they laid off at the time, and everyone was more mature, and of course they kept the ones that were younger. But how do you prove that? Because they have, you got, if you want your severance, you're gonna have to sign off on it. And that part wasn't fair, but what can you do? What can you
It's a very difficult situation, and certainly my whole life I've more or less worked for corporate America, and I've seen the same thing. My students have seen, they've told me about the skirt chasing, the sexual harassment that goes on. Everybody that I've talked to tells me the same thing. They did studies back in the 80s about, employers hiring people who were, more physically attractive, people with, more people with blue eyes and blonde hair, all these different, more women who were thin and men who were bigger and stockier and taller, falling into different gender stereotypes. Yeah, and there's a lot of that that goes on. And as you point out, it's very difficult to prove. I'm not even sure it's even worth mentioning, or making a claim, but legally, what someone could do is if, like, for example, there's an age discrimination in Employment Act. An employer is not lawfully allowed to terminate a group of people because they're over the age of 40. We know they still do that. And how burdensome would it be for you to prove that you have been terminated because you were over the age of 40? I think that you would need a lot of evidence, and usually the first step is to go to the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission in your area and file a claim. By law, that's the first step, and then the EEOC helps to do the investigation from there. So that's legally what you need to do, but it's not going to be easy to prove that. And I have had some students not even hire a lawyer, just they felt like there was employment discrimination. They were let go. They went and filed the EEOC complaint. They did all the legal work themselves, and maybe they settled for $10,000-$15,000. They got the money and moved on. So you do have a cause of action for a violation of Title VII. It's just going to take time and money to pursue that, and it might be easier just to forget about it and get another job. But no, do I think companies and organizations are following the dictates of Title VII? We know what happens in the workplace, right? We've all seen it. We've seen it everywhere. And the hot topic now is the wage disparity, right? Women making 79 cents for every man's dollar. That continues, it persists. Even within the education field, women are more frequently, seen working in the education field, but they're still not paid as much as their male counterparts. So again, there's so much gender stereotyping in this country. I think they said that the wage gap would close by like 2060 or 70, something like it's crazy. So yeah, discrimination is huge in our society, huge. Not easy to fix. Title VII is the law, but I don't think employers are going to follow it until a lawsuit is brought and they're forced to follow it, right? Because it's difficult to prove and there's no oversight. There's not a judge sitting there in the workplace. There's not an EEOC rep standing there in the workplace. I mean, you'd have to go to HR, right? You'd have to go to HR and say, I feel like I've been discriminated against. Well, gee, HR works for your employer. Whose side are they going to take?
And even now, a lot of the HR, they used to be on site in the building with you. And now you don't have that anymore. They might be in Texas, so they don't know what's going on with you. If
Yeah,
you're in
ours
Florida.
too, Barbara. Our HR person retired, and now they just have us go through the whole HR section online or through a phone call. And let me tell you, when you have issues with staff that you need, HR to review corrective actions or terminations, it's a pain because they're not there in the building anymore. But yeah, I mean, I know, I've seen the stuff that Barbara's talking about with age discrimination. I don't think I've really seen it within a company, but I've definitely seen it with coworkers. Um, a lot more than I'm really comfortable with. It's really sad. Sorry, that's a dog.
The dog doesn't like it either.
No, she doesn't. No, but yeah, I mean, it's way more common, and I don't know if it's always corporation, just because I have seen it more on the floor level than I have office level. But it does definitely happen in the office too.
Good. Thank you for sharing that, Jenny. So sexual harassment is a big term. Under Title VII, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Sexual harassment is either creating a hostile work environment through unwanted and inappropriate sexual touching, comments, or remarks that are just pervasive. The other type of sexual harassment is quid pro quo, which I've seen it occur many times, which is when employees exchange sexual favors for advancement, right? Promotions. Is so and so sleeping with the boss, now they've gotten a promotion. Oh, big surprise. When it can happen with either gender, it could be same sex, anything could happen. So it's either sexual or it's either a hostile work environment or quid pro quo. Those are the only two types of sexual harassment recognized by the law. Sexual harassment is illegal in the USA. So a couple of years ago, we saw this movement. It was called Me Too. Was that it? The Me Too movement?
Yeah,
let's
that was with all the Hollywood stars.
Yeah, me too. So I don't know. I can't say that sexual misconduct is on the rise because it's always happened. Recently, we've seen it in politics too, right? Political candidates being tried in the media to see whether or not they are of the correct character to hold public office. There was an instance about 10 years ago in Alabama where Roy Moore tried to run for the U.S. Senate in Alabama. Well, what happened is there were a lot of sexual misconduct allegations. He was accused of dating and having sexual contact with minor children who were clearly under the age of consent. Roy Moore was accused of providing alcohol to a high school cheerleader he's dating. No, of course, no one his age needs to be dating a high school student. Indecency with a minor is a criminal offense. Somehow he was never charged. Surprise. And Confucian ethics, at least, holds that public officers should demonstrate good moral character. So these are his victims. I mean, look how young these people are. And again, these pictures look like they're from the 70s and 80s. So this is not new, This is him. These are the alleged victims. These women are if I was their parent, if I was their father, it would be over. If I was their
It's the same thing with Epstein and Cuomo. I can't remember the other. Yeah, Spacek.
Weinstein, Harvey
Kevin
Weinstein.
Spacey. Yeah,
Yeah.
Weinstein. There you go. And that's just the thing. Corey Feldman, famous childhood actor, has been saying for years, I mean, many years, that this stuff has been going on, and no one ever believed him. And now, through the woodwork, here comes everybody saying, yeah, it's been happening for years.
Yes, because these men are very rich, they're very powerful, so therefore they get a pass. They can break the law because they're in positions of authority. So whatever they do gets swept under a carpet. It's horrible.
I think Kevin Spacey was the one that really kind of threw me
Who would
with
have
the
thought?
allegations against him. I'm just like, seriously, Kevin Spacey?
That was shocking. I would never. He's the last one.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. With all the stuff I've seen him in, it's just like I couldn't believe it. But power, I mean, power and authority. What are you gonna do?
Yes, and the in pictures here is one of his alleged victims, and I believe the victim in this case because there's so many of them. I do not believe Kevin Spacey. I believe if there's 15 people accusing one person of sexual harassment, this young man here has no motive to lie. It's embarrassing for him to even come forward. There's nothing to be gained by him telling the truth except for getting it off his chest, right? So if he says that Kevin Spacey sexually molested him when he was like 13 or 14, and 10 other people also say that, I believe those victims. I do not believe Kevin Spacey. And
See, that's the only thing that really concerns me, though, is because out of all of the women that accused Cuomo, and X amount of them said, yeah, no, it didn't happen. Like, I lied. And the same thing with like Brett Kavanaugh. I think it was like 3 or 4 women who came out and said he did stuff in college. And they all recanted saying, "Yeah, no, I lied." Like, that's embarrassing. Why would you do that to yourself, just a chance of harming someone's future? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is that political motivation really that strong in you that you're willing to do that to yourself?
And
So
with
I think it's the Bill Cosby is the other one.
oh yeah, he
Bill
was
Cosby, you know, with
criminally.
the drugging.
Oh,
That,
that was
I mean,
horrible.
to find
That
out,
was
I mean,
horrible.
as a child growing up and watching his shows and his comedy and stuff, that it really gave me the goosebumps.
Yeah, it's terrible, and a lot of the stuff that he did was back in the late 60s. So he was drugging these women on dates, and once they were drugged out, they can't consent to sexual activity anymore. So he simply raped them, because they were too drugged out to consent. You have to be cognizant, sober to consent to sexual activity as an adult. Children are underneath the age of consent. So a child cannot legally consent to sexual activity with an adult. The women that Bill Cosby, his victims were adults, but they were drugged out, so they can't give consent either. And some of that dated back to the 60s and 70s. Again, they were afraid to say anything because the law usually protects wealthy and powerful people, which is sad. That's a failing on the part of the police force and the law enforcement system and the justice system. They should not be covering for somebody because they're wealthy. No, nobody should be. There's not three or four different standards of the law. There's one law, and it's the same whether you're rich, poor, male, female, no matter what your ethnicity is. That would be deontological ethics anyway. Kantian ethics would say the law is the same for everybody. Anybody who rapes, who drugs, who sexually harasses should all be equally responsible according to Kantian ethics. But, the police and the lawyers think something different. They're like, ooh, well, maybe it's not a really good idea if he can hire a bunch of expensive lawyers and get off. Or I think in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, I think that those women were all given so many death threats that I think that may have motivated one or two of them to recant. We'll never know what the truth is. But yeah, they said it and then they recanted. And the one woman that testified, Dr. Blasey, she's the one that had blonde hair. She had to go into hiding. Her whole family had to go into hiding. They received death threats. So if she recanted, I'm sure it's because of the death threats. But yeah, it's a terrible, terrible thing, and it's amazing that how long it's been going on and it's been swept under the carpet for all of these years. And I haven't heard one case of a woman actually doing it, sexually harassing men. Notice that it's all been men and female or young men accusing older men of doing it. I can't think of one instance where the female was the harasser or the aggressor. Can you?
Not off the top of my head.
It's all been men aggressors. Must be all the testosterone. Men and women are inherently biologically different anyway. We're nurturers. So yeah, that's really where we're at right now is in an era of the truth being revealed, and it's not pretty. All this illegal and unethical conduct, which I cannot say is on the rise, because it's been happening forever, just being swept under the carpet, covered up. Any thoughts or comments about all this ickiness? But I can tell you, if I was the parent of one of these people, you know his parents, I think he should be hunted down and punished. I don't know how a
Yeah,
parent
and
gets.
I think the most that happened was he was just out of the news. He just kind of disappeared. I don't think anything has ever really happened. I don't think he's ever gone to court for it even.
No. It's some sort of privilege for the elite, for the wealthy. He does not have to answer for his crimes because he's wealthy. He has status. He can hire lawyers who can pull tricks. Therefore, he doesn't have to answer for his crimes. Somebody poor had done that, you can rest assured somebody poor had raped that young man right there, and the police knew about it. They'd already be, charged, sentenced, in jail, in prison, being tortured by other prisoners. But somehow Kevin Spacey is above the law. In his mind, in the mind of police, in the mind of judges, in the mind of his lawyers, because of his bank account and his status, he's above the law. And see, I think that's wrong. Because I believe in deontological ethics, universal moral laws that apply to everybody without exception. If sexual harassment or child rape is illegal when one person does it, it's illegal when he does it too. And he should be punished the same way everybody else should, no matter how well he can act. Oh,
Agreed.
yeah. Creepy, Prince Andrew, creepy.
Oh, yeah, yuck.
There's just a certain percentage of the population that engages in this sexual misconduct. One of the worst examples that I can think of that I've ever heard is the JonBenét Ramsey case. Do you remember that one? Boulder, Colorado, December
Yeah.
26, 1996. JonBenét Ramsey, a 5-year-old beauty queen, was found dead in her family's home the day after Christmas. Gee, mom, dad, and son were the only ones in the house, but nobody knows what happened. One of those people knows what happened.
Yeah, and they had proof that the ransom note was written inside the house too.
Written with Patsy's on her with her pen and on her paper and in her handwriting, laid on her stairs, and the amount of the
Asking
ransom. Yeah,
of the husband's bonus,
exactly.
exact dollar amount.
Gee, who else knew that was his bonus? No one in the world except for her. Because it was his company, so he decided the amount of the bonus probably. And the only people that knew were him and his wife. I'm supposed to believe that some stranger knew the amount of his bonus. And then the next day, when everybody was waiting for the kidnappers to call, nobody ever called.
Yeah, I was listening to I listened to it sounds weird, but I listen to murder podcasts. I love them. And the research that they had come up with too said that when they were waiting for the police to arrive, obviously they called all their family and friends. And family and friends came over, bringing over food and all that. And they were actually like cleaning the kitchen, wiping things down and moving stuff. And the police never stopped them. So they're just wiping away any and all evidence. And the police were like, oh, how nice. Your friends came by to help clean. Like, whatever. It was the 90s. Fingerprinting was a thing. What were they thinking?
You're right. I watched all those podcasts too because I lived in Colorado for 10 years. And so I was totally intrigued by that. And what happened is on the morning of I guess it was probably December 27th, 1996, there was only one police officer who responded to the call at the Ramsey's house. It was a female. When she showed up, the Ramseys had already invited all of their friends to come over and contaminate the crime scene. So she had already, they had already been told over the phone, don't touch anything and don't move anything. Yeah, I'll have to watch that. I'll have to listen to that podcast, Jenny. But that it was only one police officer who was available to respond to that call. Because if you think about it, when the police call somebody, oh, my child was missing, they're not going to send over every police officer on the force. They're going to send one person to investigate a kidnapping, right? So one female police officer shows up. She's a female, first of all. So right there and then she's at a disadvantage. There's a house full of men and women doing whatever they want. She can't stop them from going through their own house. It's one female police officer. And the female police officer told John Ramsey, why don't you go and look through your house to see if anything's out of order? Don't touch anything. Just let me know if you see something unusual. As soon as she told John Ramsey that, he went downstairs into the basement and comes up 2 minutes later with JonBenét's dead body wrapped up in a blanket. And that female police officer said that there was a silent moment between her and Jan Ramsey where they looked into each other's eyes. And in that moment, it was unspoken. It was like he said, "Yeah, I killed her." It was just unspoken. And she said that she never felt so chilled or freaked out in her life as a moment when he came upstairs with his own daughter's dead body. And she was just like, ooh. I mean, she's like, at that moment, she didn't know if she was going to have to, grab her gun or what she was going to have to do, because she knew she was staring into the eyes of a killer, you know, from her perspective. And she's in this house full of their friends, and she's the only police officer there. She's a female officer, and he's done, it was just a really bizarre, bizarre thing. And of course, the Ramseys immediately hired their lawyers and like, we didn't do anything. We don't know what happened. But who else would have had a motive to kill JonBenét? Okay, Jenny, who do you think did it?
Oh, I don't know. I have a suspicion it's one of the parents. I really do. But that's, I mean, it was such a horrific story back then. I remember when it happened. But yeah, I mean, it's got to be the parents.
Yeah, I agree. I think that after having watched, all these different podcasts and looking at what happens, the fathers of beauty pageant contestants have been known to sexually abuse those women sometimes. Other female beauty contestants have come forward saying that when they were young, their fathers molested them. So I believe that John did it. I believe that sexual assault was the motivation. And maybe during whatever weird stuff they were doing in the basement, he killed JonBenét. She had been to her doctor something like 50 times within the last couple of years. Her body had, all kind of signs of sexual trauma, old and new. So yeah, something bad was going on. And logically, the only person that could be committing that kind of sexual assault would be her father. And Patsy, of course, wants to cover up for her husband, right? She's already lost her daughter. She needs to cover up this crime so she doesn't lose her husband too. So she covers up the crime by faking this ransom note and then this ridiculous phone call to the police. So I think that John Ramsey is sexually assaulted JonBenét and then killed her in the basement by hitting her with a blunt object. He'll never be, again, he's a millionaire. He's not going to ever go to jail for that. Not ever, because he is also outside and above the law. Bad. Terrible, terrible stuff. But moving on, any other comments about sexual harassment, abusive women, abusive children by creepy male predators? Yuck. Our last topic for this week is terrorism and torture. What do you automatically think about when you hear the word terrorism? Does anything come to mind, Barbara?
9/11, I think of that. Yeah, that's what come to
I
my
was
mind.
thinking the same thing,
Yeah.
9/11.
Yes, those of us who are from a certain generation, who are of a certain age on that day, when I hear the word terrorism, I immediately go back to 9/11. And ironically, I was doing the same thing then that I'm doing now. I was teaching, I had class that night. And I think that we just watched TV in class. I did not give a lecture. We just watched TV and I let everybody go early. Um, so yeah, my life hasn't really changed that much since then, but I do remember the day vividly. And even now, I also think, because I live in Nevada, I think about the Las Vegas shooting because that was an act of terror. It was domestic terrorism, but it was still designed to put people in fear. So, So does anyone know what the motivation? Janice says, I was in high school. We watched TV all day. Terrible, terrible, awful, 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 awful. The sad thing is knowing, now that our government got warned all summer of 2001 that a terrorist attack was imminent. The people in charge at the time just dismissed it because I'm sure they get warnings all the time, bomb threats. But the people who were in charge of the government got warnings, heavy warnings during the summer of 2001 that a terrorist attack on the United States was imminent. They just brushed it off. They're like, just another warning. Does anyone know what the motivation was? So September 11 attacks were a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by the Islamic terrorist group Al Qaeda on the United States on the morning of Tuesday, September 11, 2001. The attacks consisted of suicide bombings used to target symbolic U.S. landmarks. Does anyone know why Al Qaeda did this?
I don't remember the specific reason, but I know Bin Laden tried doing the same thing in the 90s.
Yes, yes. So Bin Laden took responsibility. Bin Laden took responsibility for the attacks. He was a chemical engineer, so he was a trained scientist. He knew how to create explosive using airplanes. Um, he cited U.S. support of Israel and the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia and our sanctions against Iraq. So he felt that the United States was interfering with the balance of power in the Middle East. He felt that, the 2 or 3 thousand year long Arab-Israeli dispute where the Palestinians have been claiming that they own and they have a right to the same property and land that Israel has, that dispute right there, they feel like the United States takes Israel's side, making it harder for the Palestinians to gain any ground over there. So they feel like we are affecting the balance of power in the Middle East. So the way that they're going to pay us back is through an act of terror to make it so the United States is never the same again. And Bin Laden planned it probably for 20 years. It was not an easy thing to plan. He had to, get supporters. He had to get members of Al Qaeda to come to the United States and learn how to fly planes. That took years, years. So they were coordinated attacks that he carried out on 9/11. So that was it. It was to punish us for our political presence in the Middle East and our support of Israel, because we give money to Israel. Israel is our ally, and Israel oppresses the Palestinians over there by telling them, get off this piece of land. You have no land. You have nowhere to live. So it's a really, really, really old Arab-Israeli dispute over there. And we've been sticking our nose into it, sort of the same way that the Ukraine wants us to stick their nose into that. Wants us to go fight this war against Russia. What do you think about that? That's more current. Do you think the United States should get involved in the war between Ukraine and Russia?
I do.
Okay.
I think we're watching people suffer and being killed by a maniac, and I think they need help.
What do you think, Barbara?
I hate the fact that people are dying. When you see the little children, I hate that fact, and I don't like it, and I don't want it to happen, and I'm hoping somebody can stop it, but who, I don't know, because I can't say that the United States can do it all by themselves. I don't know who can, but I don't think it's fair. But then I hate for anybody to get killed anywhere.
Is horrible. Putin is evil. From
Oh,
what I understand, his motivation is that he doesn't have enough territory right now. And if the Ukraine were to join NATO, then that again, that would shift the balance of power away from Russia. So he wants to the Ukraine, he wants the amount of land that the former Soviet Union had before 1989 when Gorbachev said tear down this wall. So Putin wants more land. He would really like to have a lot more land than he has currently. So therefore, let's just go take the land that the the Ukrainians live, you know.
I think it's a much bigger plan. I think it's, first take Ukraine and then continue moving forward.
Mhm.
And I think if they do get Ukraine, that is going to leave a huge opening for China to take Taiwan. And it's just going to keep going. They're going to be two massive powers. I think they have about 4 or 5 countries that are with them, and take their side.
Mm.
Um, but it's one of those, something has to be done before it gets to that point. And I know right now we're giving a lot of money, but that can only take Ukraine so far. They really need support. And I'm not all about boots on the ground. But when you see so many people being attacked and treated the way that they're being treated, I think the United States has always set a moral, ethical code not to stand by and watch that happen. And that's basically what we're doing right now. We're standing by and watching it happen.
Yes, you're right. I'll just give you a little tiny historical viewpoint on this. So the first president of the United States was George Washington. I grew up in Virginia, so when you grow up in Virginia, you learn everything about George Washington and the other US presidents that came from Virginia. So George Washington was the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest men in the United States at the time of the Revolution. He was the general of the Revolutionary War Army. So after the British were defeated at Yorktown, they told George Washington, "We want you to be president." He said, "I don't want to be president." He said, "This is a democracy." I mean, they wanted him to be king. He said, "I don't want to be king." I said, "Maybe I'll be your president, but I'm not going to be king." And George Washington had a lot of views on things. One of his big views was isolationism. He did not want the United States sticking our nose in the affairs of other countries. So, there's a certain group of people that follow that isolationist view. And that's what happened during World War II is that isolationist view, which was again like, let's just sit back and watch Hitler. Let's watch him kill 6 million Jews. Let's watch him invade Europe. Let's watch him invade Italy. Let's watch him take over France, and then when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, okay, we're involved now. And a lot of people think the same thing that what Jenny is saying, that the United States waited too long before getting involved in World War II because we could have stopped a lot of people from dying and a lot of people from suffering. We could have stopped the Holocaust from being as bad if we had gotten involved in World War II sooner, you know. So, and again, yeah, and we have the same situation, going on now, where I see our government taking an isolation viewpoint where they're trying to containment, they're trying to, contain the situation, not escalate it, allowing the human rights violations to continue in the Ukraine, and that we'll just send money. And how long are we just going to send money and remain isolationist? It's a
And
terrible.
when you watch the news, they say, they don't want us providing support in the air, or creating a no-fly zone because that would initially ignite World War III. But at the same time, I think it's going to come either way. Why would we ever believe for a second that Putin is going to stop at Ukraine? He's going to take it over. He's going to take on their troops and military. He's going to go to the next country he wants, and it's not going to stop. It's only inevitable until a war comes. I mean, to us anyway. That's what he wants. It's his whole plan. Like, he's not keeping it a secret. So why
Mm-mm.
are we going to sit there and wait until it's going to be a bigger battle? That makes no sense to me.
Hmm. It's a contain. It is. It's the containment and the isolationist attitude, which is designed to not to. The United States is trying to prevent from escalating it. And I can't really say which side is right or wrong. Certainly, if you take the idea, if you believe in REN, minimizing, if you believe in utilitarian ethics, minimizing suffering, showing compassion, that would suggest that we need to do more, right? That we need to get involved more. So it's another one of those issues of which moral lens, what moral perspective are we taking? I think right now the United States government is trying to prevent from escalating it because it is possible. I would hope that somebody could take Putin out, make him a prisoner of war. And I'm really surprised that that hasn't happened already, but he's protected, he's protected by a group of very wealthy and powerful men. Because that would be the ideal situation, or if we could even just send a drone over there to take out Putin. But then would somebody else carry out his master plan? If we were to send a drone over there, take out Putin, would someone else carry out his plan? Yeah, it's definitely it's a hard question. It really is a hard question, and there is also a possibility that the Ukraine and Russia could reach some sort of agreement through the negotiations. Honestly, if I was in the position of the Ukraine, I would just surrender. Rather than continuing to have more people get killed, I might just surrender, save the lives of citizens, and just live under Putin. But no, that's not what they want. They want their freedom. They're a separate culture. They have a different history. Goonies never say, yeah. It's a very, very difficult situation. It really is hard. But I know our government is trying to de-escalate, and we're trying to avoid World War III, if that's even possible. But yeah, I would like to see someone just take Putin out. I think we have the technology to send a drone over there. Yeah, I believe in the direct method when that can be done. Why beat around the bush? We know what needs to be done. Just go do it. I mean, eventually we had to take out Osama bin Laden. Eventually we had to take out the bad guy who was in Saddam Hussein. May as well do it sooner rather than later. So, well, thank you, everyone. I've let this discussion go on a little bit longer. Thank you, Barbara and Jenny, for your excellent participation in the live sessions this term. So we have reached the end of the Ethics Around the Globe course. And your last live session question is, what is your favorite ethical theory that we've studied this term? Please be sure to submit your answer by Friday, March 18th. The last day to submit assignments for the Ethics Around the Globe course is Friday at midnight Central Standard Time. And it's also the end of winter term too. So spring is right around the corner. Looking forward to it. So if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. I appreciate all the hard work that everyone has put in this term. It really shows in your excellent work and the excellent quality of your writing. So any more questions for me before we wrap up this last live session, Jenny or Barbara?
I don't have any questions, but I want to thank you. I've really enjoyed this class.
Oh, you're welcome, Jenny. When I teach, I try to teach the same exact way that I was taught when I was in college. I try to carry on that tradition, that endless passage of knowledge that occurs. you know, and I really liked my professors. When I was in college, I was very close to them. Things were very different back then. I remember going to Burger King with one of my professors, and we used to hang out at their houses and do picnics. And when I taught in person in Colorado, my students used to invite me to their houses for, you know, for graduation parties, for happy hours, for a lot of that. So I've always, you know, wanted to share that same that rich tradition and interaction and collegiality, you know, between students and faculty. And it's a little bit different when we're in an online environment. So these live sessions, you know, still give you a chance to have that part, that oral part of your education, you know, where you're still able to interact with others, which, you know, for those of us who are social creatures, that's very important. So I'm glad that you enjoyed the live sessions, Jenny, and I just absolutely appreciate your participation. Yes, everyone take care and be safe in this crazy and unstable world.
So true, so true. And I
You
thank
know,
you also.
you're welcome. The world was also unstable when I was in college, so this is no different. And we all survived, and we're all going to survive this as well. It was very uncertain times then as in now, and nothing is different, nothing has changed. And you know, we're just all going to learn from this and be stronger. So hang
So
in there.
so true. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
Barbara. Bye, Jenny.
bye-bye. And again, thank you.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure getting to know you both this term.
And so, Professor, before I